Welcome back for part 11. Today we're talking about the rogue. Let's get started with the strengths and weaknesses. So, rogues have a very powerful hero ability. It's actually one of the best ones to play on turn 2 because after you use it on turn 2 you still have a 1-1 weapon and you can occasionally chime in 1 damage elsewhere, even if you're playing on curve for the next couple turns. Their combo elements can be very powerful, such as Defias Ringleader. It's one of the strongest 2-drops if you can actually get the 2-1 combo element to come out with it. And it's also got many mechanisms to cycle cards, like Shiv and Fan of Knives. They do something and then they draw a card as well. And they have many powerful weapon synergies. But rogues struggle in the sense that some of their real strengths in tempo, when I'm talking about cards like Sap and Vanish, they don't matter as much in Arena as they do in constructed play, because tempo is very important when you have all of the necessary elements to always push an advantage and always stay ahead. But in Arena you can't reliably draft fantastic or ridiculously good decks to constantly push an advantage once one is achieved. So cards like Sap don't matter very much. And we'll talk about that later. It also has weak removal spells. Assassinate is pretty costly, and because of the combo elements, which we talked about as a strength, they also have difficulties maintaining their card advantage. But they sometimes do have the cycling abilities. We'll talk about it all as we move forward. So let's get started with the weapons. Perdition's Blade, deal 1 damage. Battlecry, deal 2 instead. So, or combo I should say, deal 2 instead. So, if you can deal 2 damage with a weapon right off the bat, this first swing of the weapon could be a 4-2, and the second swing is this weapon is 1 hit does 4 damage, and 1 hit does 2 damage. And that's a total of 6 damage for 3 mana. Which is, if you think about Fiery War Axe, which is 6 damage in 2 durability for 2 mana, this card is a little bit below average. But, like we always say with weapons, and we talked about this with Glaivezuka and Hunter a little bit, it's so important with weapons to be able to use your health as a resource to maintain board control, get board control, or have some sort of kind of way to gain control of the situation and start to be able to be more powerful and extend a lead or create a lead. And what Perdition's Blade allows you to do is you can split up your damage, or you can just deal damage. And it's not the best card in the world, obviously, because it doesn't beat that Fiery War Axe level of ridiculously good, but it is still a good card because you can divide up the damage that it deals in a way that could be useful to you. It's still below the mana curve even with the 2 damage, so 2 damage is equivalent, I think, 1.33 mana. Even if this card is like a 1.66 mana 2/2, it's still pretty average in that sense. So Perdition's Blade is okay. Cogmaster's Wrench has +2 attack while you have a mech. So this is similar to Perdition's Blade, and so say you get your combo off with Perdition's Blade. You deal 6 damage for 3 mana. Say you have a mech out with Cogmaster's Wrench. You do 9 damage for 3 mana. So in that sense, Cogmaster's Wrench would be much better if you have a mech. However, it's very difficult to, especially in the early game when this card is most valuable, to be able to play a Cogmaster's Wrench and then keep your mech alive, even with having the weapon. And so a 1/3 weapon for 3 mana is terrible. It's worse than a Light's Justice, and Light's Justice costs 1 mana. And even if you're able to pull it off with the mech, it's fantastic. But the likelihood of you being able to pull it off with a mech, especially in Arena where you can't reliably draft mechs, makes this card very difficult to acquire value out of it. And for that reason, I don't think it's very good. It's actually not very good. And if you think about it as well, it's an epic. So in the epic slot, you also have cards like Patient Assassin for Rogue, which is not fantastic, but it's still much better than a Cogmaster's Wrench. You also have cards like Kidnapper, which suck as well, but and Preparation. So if you think about it that way, it's not the worst epic to pick up, but it's not the best epic. The ones I just think of that are class epics, a Patient Assassin would be the best one. Assassin's Blade, you can't see the durability because it's cut off with my webcam, but it has 4 durability, so it's a 5 mana, 3 attack, 4 durability weapon. And the reason why Assassin's Blade is good and constructed sometimes, even, now it's not always played and constructed anymore, is because you can put on cards like Tinker's Sharp Sword Oil or Deadly Poison, and all of a sudden your weapon is ridiculously strong and has a lot of durability. In Arena, you can't reliably get those kind of synergies. However, Assassin's Blade is still good even if the stats aren't fantastic, because you can constantly, for 4 turns, you can be controlling the board using no other resource than this one weapon, this one card. And that's really powerful, especially considering the card can do a maximum of 12 damage by itself. You toss on a Deadly Poison and all of a sudden it can deal 20 damage. You toss on a Tinker Sharp Sword Oil, it can do even more. So, Assassin's Blade it's good if you have one of them. I wouldn't suggest picking up any more than one, because it's already difficult to want to use your 4 charges of Assassin's Blade one after the other. And so, having 2 of those circumstances, that's 8 turns of weapon that you can't play until turn 5, so it's unlikely that you're going to be able to use all of the charges on the second Assassin's Blade. It's much more unlikely than if it was the first. So 1 is good, 2 is bad, 3 is terrible. Alright, now we are on to spells. Backstab, deal 2 damage to an undamaged minion. So this card is very good because it allows... Think about it this way. Let's say that I have a 2 mana deal 3 damage spell. The cookie cutter stuff we've always talked about as being cookie cutter and being good. So let's say you queue up you play your hero ability, and now you have a 1/2 weapon, and then you apply the backstab, and then you hit it with your face. That is 2 mana, deal 3 damage. That only costs 1 card. So in that sense, backstab plus your hero ability is really good. Sometimes it won't work because of the undamaged minion part, but a card as good as backstab is going to need to have some sort of caveat. But also, now that we talked about it in the sense that it can be a 2 mana deal 3 damage, it can also just be the deal 2 damage. There's a lot of times that you're going to use a Frostbolt or a Quick Shot on a 3/2. And you're not going to need to use all 3 damage points. With backstab, you can not miss anything, not spend any mana, and still be really powerful. And so, backstab is a top tier pick. I know a lot of people, it's kind of like Power Word Shield, where even though it's an early game card, still you can pick up 2 or 3 of them and still be in a really good spot. So backstab I think is probably an 8 or 9 out of 10. Alright, Preparation. The next spell you cast this turn costs 3 less. This card is entirely dependent on other cards to be good, and worse, it's entirely dependent on other spells to be good, and rogues don't have a lot of spells that cost a lot of mana as it is. As you could see, this first slide starts with 3 cards that cost 0 mana, and in case you mess up your Preparation, then you're screwed. Just like that motto, prep coin concede, because your prep does nothing with the coin. But anyway, this card is terrible in Arena because you really can't get any other use. You can't get any useful spells that are going to need to be applied with Preparation for it to be good. So, Preparation is, I think I'm going to give it a 1. Shadow Step. Return a friendly minion to your hand. It costs 2 less. So this is basically a healing. This is basically to either heal your minion or to reuse its battle cry effect. And there are not a lot of battle cry effects in the game that justify immediately using Shadow Step to just play it and then take it back. This is another card, just like Preparation and Backstab really, that are top tier in rogue decks. in constructed play, but that's because, especially let's think about it in terms of Mill Rogue. So Mill Rogue, the purpose of the game is to stall out and force you to overdraw or lose via fatigue. With Preparation, you can say play Preparation and then Vanish, and Vanish now only costs 3 mana, so you can do other things your turn, like heal yourself up, or draw cards, or something like that, that allows you to continue to do your thing. With Shadow Step, you want to use your Shadow Step to reuse the Cold Light Oracle, draw 2 cards, each player draws 2 cards, Battle Cry, over and over and over again. In Arena, there is no Battle Cry that you are going to be like, I need to use that again all the time, no matter what. That isn't the case in Arena. Shadow Step is still better than Preparation because you can basically use it as a heal for a bigger minion. If your Boulder Fist Ogre gets down to 2 or 3 health, you can Shadow Step it back and play it the next turn, and it's going to cost you a little bit in terms of tempo, but your Boulder Fist Ogre is not going to die. So Shadow Step is a 2. It's better than Preparation, but not good. Deadly Poison, give your weapon +2 attack. Now, if Deadly Poison was a card in any other class, it would be terrible because it's entirely dependent on you playing a weapon. However, because you're in Rogue and you can obviously create a weapon at any point with your hero ability, giving your weapon +2 attack is saying, for 1 mana, deal at least 4 damage. Thinking about it, most Rogue weapons have 2 durability. Some are different, but talk about that later, or we already did talk about it, never mind. But say, give a weapon an additional 4 damage over the course of 2 swings for 1 mana. 1 mana deal 4 damage is fantastic. Deadly Poison is a very good card. Deadly Poison is a 10. 10 might be generous. I'll give it an 8 or a 9. Sorry about that, the doorbell rang, but we are going to keep going with Sinister Strike. Deal 3 damage to the enemy hero. Sinister Strike is a bad card because, yes, 1 mana, deal 3 damage is good, but it's to the enemy hero, so you can't control the board, and you can't actually use it to do anything useful other than end the game. And ending the game is not a race. Cold Blood, give a minion +2 attack combo, give it 4 attack instead. Cold Blood is an okay card. First off, it's entirely dependent on a minion to be good. It also really needs the combo effect to be good, and giving a minion +4 attack only really allows that minion to trade up into something bigger, and it won't exactly allow it to just be kind of a force to be reckoned with on its own. If you can make it work in the late game, which is kind of unlikely, then this card is good. And you think about it in the sense that if you put it on a Boulder Fist Ogre, as I talked about before, you can create a 10-7, which is very powerful. However, what is a 10-7 going to do that a 6-7 can't? And it's not that much more. So for that reason, Cold Blood has a very limited array of uses and has a very dependent ability on other cards, and so it's average to below average. It's a 3 or a 4. Conceal, give your minions stealth until your next turn. So this card is basically saying your minions can't die except to board clear, to RNG cards. Your minions cannot be targeted next turn. And that is sometimes very useful, but not very useful enough of the time. Sometimes you will lose games to Conceal, sometimes you will win games due to Conceal, just because it's that part of the game where you need your last creature to stay alive a turn, and he has the ability to clear it, but if you give it Conceal, all of a sudden you can just bypass that targeted ability and win the game. That will happen some of the time, and for that reason I'm going to give the card a 3 or a 4. But Conceal cannot reliably get value, and it also just doesn't do anything on its own. It's dependent on other cards to be useful. That phrase has been used a billion times in this set, or in this series. But really, you want cards to be independently strong, and Conceal is not. 3 or a 4. Sap, return an enemy minion to its owner's hand. Sap is okay. I'm gonna give this card a 5. The reason is it's more like late game removal, and it's not even removal. But say that your opponent plays a Sunwalker, or an Ogre, or a War Golem, or anything that really expensive, anything that costs 6 or 7 mana, and you play Sap on it. Your opponent now has to spend an entire turn to replay that card and redevelop their board, which takes a turn, which allows you to further develop your board, which is good, in the sense that you spent 2 mana to force them to pay 6 more mana, or 7 more mana, or 8 more mana. And that's a win for you. However, if you use this card in the early game just because, okay, I have a couple minions on the board and my opponent just played something that I can't deal with right away, I'm going to sap it and just kind of keep going. Well, unfortunately, let's say you sap like a 3/4, like a spider tank, because you have a lot of 2/2s or 2/3s or 3/2s on the board. If your opponent just replays that card, you still haven't dealt with that problem, and it didn't cost them too much or too much of their turn to actually do anything with it. I don't know if you can really fully understand the point I'm trying to get at here, but what I'm saying is Sap just delays what they're going to play, and sometimes, especially if it's a bigger card, you're forcing them to spend a lot of mana to do the same thing that they wanted to do already, and you get a massive advantage. But if you use it on a card that doesn't really cost more than 5 or 6 mana, your opponent can just say, okay, you used a card that did more or less nothing, and I'm going to be a little bit behind, but now I'm just going to play it again, and I'm right back on point. And in that sense, when you can only sap something, and when you sap something and then it forces them to just play it again, they may just lose like 1 turn, or you just gain like 1 turn of damage to their face, as opposed to anything really useful, in that sense. So Sap is a 5. Betrayal. As an enemy minion deals its damage to the minions next to it. I don't remember reading that as that card text. I feel like that's outdated. It's basically you choose a minion, and then it does the damage to the minions adjacent to it. Betrayal is a kind of mediocre removal card. Like we talked about in the strengths and weaknesses, rogues have pretty weak removal cards, and Betrayal, this is one of them. But just like Sap, there will be times where you need the Betrayal to catch up a little bit on board. And it's not going to really clear your opponent's board, and it's not going to sometimes even have a big impact on your opponent's board, but it's going to do something, and it's going to hit more than 1 minion, and it's okay. For two mana, it's okay. If it cost any more, it would be really bad. In Arena, at least. This card is probably I'll go with a 5 as well. Alright, let's keep moving. Eviscerate. Deal 2 damage, combo deal 4 damage instead. Obviously, 2 mana, deal 2 damage is bad. 2 mana, deal 4 damage is great. Make the combo work, and you have a great card in front of you, 7 or 8. Because this card, it doesn't cost too much, so it could reliably be used to get the combo. Not too much to talk about there. Gang Up. Choose a minion, shuffle 3 copies of it into your deck. 2 mana, do nothing. What it is. That's really what it is. This card is great in Mill Rogue because it allows you to have more cards so you don't fatigue as quickly as your opponent does. But that will not be the case for you as an arena player, and sometimes you'll need 3 extra copies of a big card, but what's the likelihood you're going to draw them, and all 3 of them are going to be really useful in the course of the game? Very, very unlikely. So Gang Up is bad. It's 2 or 3. Shiv, deal 1 damage, draw a card. Would I pay half a mana to deal 1 damage? Well, 1 mana is worth 0.66 mana, or 1 damage is worth 0.66 mana. And so paying that gives you a okay discount. And so for that reason, Shiv is okay. The reason why I'm hesitant to call it good, even though we just talked about how it meets the mana requirement per se, is because dealing 1 damage is usually pretty minor, and it's important not to get caught up in the fact that even if it's mana efficient, it needs to do something. It needs to be useful enough to justify a slot in your deck. And Shiv sort of doesn't do that. It cycles, which is good, but dealing 1 damage is pretty mediocre. So combine the good and the bad, and you have a card that's average. Shiv is a 6. Blade Flurry. Destroy your weapon and deal damage to all enemies. So Blade Flurry is, at the absolute worst, dagger up Blade Fury. You pay 4 mana for an Arcane Explosion. But you won't pick up Blade Flurry if that's going to be the case. Blade Flurry is going to be your best removal card, even though it's dependent on other cards to be useful. And that's why it's going to get a somewhat high rating. But think about how Blade Flurry is going to destroy your weapon, and it needs a high attack value on that weapon. So, for that to happen, you need to have Deadly Poisons, or Tinker's Sharpsword Oils, or other weapons in your deck. And if you draft those, and later on in your deck you find that the Blade Flurry will be effective, then you use it. And you pick it up, and it'll be very powerful. But you can't pick it when you don't have any weapons or any Deadly Poisons. And it's not that hard to get Deadly Poisons. They're free, they're like Fan of Knives. They don't have any rarity, so they're gonna show up a good amount in your draft. It's likely, at least, for that to happen. And if you can reliably get a couple of them, and if you use Blade Flurry, Blade Flurry plus Deadly Poison, or Deadly Poison plus Blade Flurry on even a dagger, your hero ability, is a 3 mana deal 3 damage to all enemies, which is much more powerful than Consecration is. Well, it's not much more powerful, but 1 damage is very important in that case. So it's more powerful than a card like Consecration, which we talk about as one of those prime removal cards that's very effective. So Blade Flurry is a 6 or a 7. Excuse me. Fan of Knives. Deal 1 damage to all enemy minions. Draw a card. So this comes with the same amount of just as hesitant about this card as I was about Shiv. Dealing 1 damage to all enemy minions still can be very useful. Drawing a card, so the card replaces itself in your hand, is very good. You still have the cycling ability, but dealing 1 damage is still, even if it's to all enemy minions, is still sometimes completely useless, or very minor in the grand scheme of things, and you're paying 3 mana for it. So would you pay 1.5 mana to deal 1 damage to all enemy minions? It's better than Arcane Explosion, but it's not good still. So, Fan of Knives is average to below average. I'll give it a 5. Head Crack. Deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. Combo, return this to your hand next turn. I always thought this card was super cool. Unfortunately, it really it really doesn't do anything besides attack the enemy hero, and it costs a lot of mana, and it doesn't affect the board, and it simply is a hunter hero ability that you have to play after another card, which is bad. Just like we talked about how the hunter hero ability, yes, it's good at closing the game, but no, it's not good at winning the game. You need your board to do that. So, Headcrack is terrible. I like this card. I'm hesitant to give it a 1, but it's a 1. It's just doesn't do enough for its cost, and it doesn't affect the board. Tinker's Sharpsword Oil. Give your weapon +3 attack. Combo, give a random friendly minion +3 attack. This card will... Okay, if you think about Deadly Poison, 1 mana, give your weapon +2 attack. Tinker Sharpsword Oil, 4 mana, give your weapon +3 attack. Obviously, if you're not using it with the combo piece, Tinker Sharp Sword Oil is going to be a very below average card. But if you can give a random friendly minion +3 attack as well, you're looking at a card that could be very beneficial. Even in the sense that you compare it with other cards that have a similar effect. Say, give a friendly minion +3 attack is a Blessing of Might, and a Blessing of Might, it costs 1 mana. It's a paladin card. And give your weapon +3 attack is equivalent of saying 1.5 deadly poisons. So, you add 1 mana, and then you add 1.5 mana, and you have a card that is supposedly worth 2.5 mana as your Tinker Sharp Sword Oil. However, the reason why this card is good is, first off, it does both of those in one for only the cost of 1 card, and it works very well with the fact that the rogue uses its hero ability, or can use its hero ability, and then another card, and then use the oil, and all of a sudden you have a very powerful minion, and you have a very powerful weapon, and you can clear your opponent's stuff, and just play a really powerful minion, all on the same turn with your oil. And for that reason, Tinker Sharp Sword Oil is good. It's not as good as Deadly Poison is just because of its mana cost, but even though you would be hesitant to it just by comparing it to other cards, the rogue hero ability is so important in how rogues win games that giving a buff to that is worth paying the extra mana for. So Tinker Sharp Sword Oil is a 7 or an 8. Sabotage, destroy a random enemy minion, combo, and your opponent's weapon. So the combo piece is only very situationally useful, especially because Mage is the most powerful, or most, I wouldn't say most powerful, most popular class in Arena. And some argue, a lot of people argue, that Mage is also the best card. And there's reason to believe that, and there's some evidence behind it. But the combo piece of Sabotage is likely not very useful. So, destroy a random enemy minion. How useful is that? Well, it depends entirely on the board and what you're going to be using it against, and what's the likelihood you're actually going to get it to hit. Sabotage is one of those cards that's difficult to evaluate, but I will think about it in terms of Deadly Shot. So, Deadly Shot is the Hunter destroy a random enemy minion. It costs 3 mana. So, would rogues play the same card that costs 1 more mana? And the answer is, in Arena, it's a situational pick that could be very good, especially if the other epic options are poor. We talked about epic options earlier. Patient Assassin, Sabotage, Preparation, Kidnapper. Two of those options I said are terrible, and 2 are okay. And Sabotage and Patient Assassin are both okay, and there will be times where you're going to pick up this card because it's just the best option. And there will be times that you get good value out of it, and there will be times that you don't. It's the luck of the draw, but on the bright side, Sabotage is hard removal, and if you can reliably get it to hit one target, it's better than Assassinate. And if you get it to work with your combo piece, the more power to you. Assassinate. Oh, I should give Sabotage a rating. I'll give it a 5. It can be really useful. It's just very situational. Assassinate. Destroy an enemy minion. We've compared other cards to this before. And for that reason, I'm going to give it kind of like an Arcane Intellect, like view, in that Arcane Intellect or Sense Demons or Thought Steal is just a standard 5 because we use it as the basis to compare all other cards. It itself is not disgustingly overpowered, and it itself is not disgustingly underpowered. It's average. It is hard removal, and you'll probably pick up 1 or 2 of them in your deck, which is not a problem, because they can be good. But destroy an enemy minion for 5 mana is still quite costly, and that's why there's the downside to the card. Solid 5. Last and final 2, Vanish. Return all minions to their owner's hand. This is simply saying 6 mana, reset the board, but you lose your turn. So, if you are trying to reset the board, you are likely behind. and if you return all minions to your opponent's hand, and you return the minions to your hand, you get a chance to start over with that. However, you paid 6 mana to do it, and so now your opponent is ahead again. That's why this card is terrible. 1. Maybe 2. Alright, Sprint. Draw 4 cards. So, if we were to go across the standard line of the 1.5 mana is equivalent to drawing a card, then we would expect this card to cost 6 mana. The reason it costs 7 is because preparation is a thing in Rogue, and if you can pull off a prep sprint, it's actually fantastic. The likelihood that you'll do that, however, is quite low. So, preparation, or not preparation, just sprint, drawing 4 cards at the cost of 1 is basically paying your entire turn to refresh your hand, which is a major loss in tempo. However, what Sprint can do is that it can completely fill up your hand with useful cards with only using 1 card yourself. And so drawing 4 cards, I would say, even paying the extra mana is still better than drawing 2 cards. But this is a card that's also dependent on your curve. If you have a lower cost curve and you're constantly using all the minions in your hand, you have a lot of 2-drops, a lot of 3-drops, couple 4-drops, and not a lot of late game, then Sprint is a fantastic card to supplement that kind of deck, where you can play Sprint and all of a sudden on your next turn have many more options at your disposal that you can use almost each and every one of them. Or hell, you play Sprint on turn 10 or when you have 10 mana and you can still play something afterwards. That's when Sprint is really good. And Sprint can be really good a lot of the time. But it's, like I said, dependent on the curve of the deck. For that reason, I give Sprint a 6 out of 10. It could be good, it could be bad. It's dependent on your curve of the deck. That's how it is. Alright, so that is the Rogue evaluation. I hope I made sense. I hope you learned something from this video. And I hope you stay tuned for the next part. Until then, good night, good day, good morning, wherever you are, and take care.